Live. Everywhere. On netrootsradio.com. David Waldman. Kagro. In the morning. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Friday, September 16th, 2022. Did I see it was a Mexican holiday today on the NAFTA calendar? Shoot, I should have looked more closely at that. I just realized, I passed by and I saw, okay. Is it possibly Independence Day again? I don't know. They have several that we mistakenly call Independence Day. Yeah, it is. Mexican Independence Day, September 16th, 2022. I don't know if that's a official celebration because it's a Friday and everybody's off, or whether that's the annual celebration that, like July 4th, it just falls on the day it does. I don't know. We only remember Cinco de Mayo in this country because it comes with a beer, and an official beer, because they advertise the hell out of it, and now we just think that that's the real holiday, and apparently it isn't. It's something else entirely. Anyway. Yeah, so happy Independence Day to Mexico. Yes, this is the date that Mexico celebrates independence from Spain in 1810, just so you know exactly which one we're talking about. I guess in Cinco de Mayo we're talking about not so much the independence as, let's get France out of here because they're annoying us as well. And I guess they had been handed over to the French at that point. I don't know. I don't remember what happens. All I know is I'm supposed to remember that no, Cinco de Mayo isn't really their Independence Day, even though they advertise it heavily here. Or they don't, but we do. The beer companies. Anyway, that's it. That's all I have to say about that because I know nothing about anything. Other things on my mind this morning. Well, for one thing, just before today's show, I got another email about Hardee's. You like that? Just to clarify, that there are no Washington, D.C., close-in metropolitan Washington, D.C. area Hardee's in the offing for you if you're wandering around looking to have your phone seized. And we had some speculation from Tim Lapham, who was listening to the show, saying, where might you have seen one? Because there aren't any in your area, in our area, in Loudoun County. And the nearest clusters, he's done some research on this, are in Fredericksburg and Baltimore. Now, that's just clusters. I don't know whether there are individual outlets elsewhere, but he was speculating that perhaps I had seen them there when I was saying, you don't see them around very much here in Washington, and you don't. But the Hardee's that I see occasionally, or used to see, back when we would drive with some frequency through Orange, Virginia, on Route 15, there's a Hardee's just sitting out there in the middle of nowhere. I wonder how they do. They're actually like literally across the street from a McDonald's. So if you're just like in Orange, Virginia, and you've got to have a fast food hamburger, you got to know what you're doing and got to know where you're going in order to end up at Hardee's. But I guess they serve other things too. I don't know what they serve that McDonald's doesn't, but it doesn't matter because apparently McDonald's owns Hardee's. So what's the difference? They don't care one way or the other. They don't care if you go to Chipotle. They don't care if you go to Hardee's. They don't care what happens. They get your money one way or the other. So, okay. Anyway, if you'd like to send a report on where there are Hardee's locations near you, but you can't because you were going to text me and they seized your phone, well, then you're in the same boat as the pillow guy. And I don't know. I guess I wish you were the billionaire instead of him. Wouldn't that be nice? Okay, by the way, speaking of things happening in Loudoun County, there's a lot of it. And I had been noting quietly that COVID cases had been taking a nosedive in terms of daily average number of cases reported for some time, and did finally go down. I think we noted on the show when it dipped below 100 average cases being reported day to day, and it made it down into the 60s. It's currently on the rebound and headed back up through the 80s. So it might be time to go and get that new booster shot. I'm sure everybody's on their way out to go and do that. Not looking forward to it exactly, but I thought I better get it taken care of. And I think if you're waiting on it for some reason too, I think it's probably time to run out and get it if you're inclined to do so. And I think everybody on listening to the show probably is. And if you're not,
oh my fucking God, get the fucking vaccine already, you fucking fucks.
Yeah, so you get the message from Greg. I think he made it pretty clear that you should be going and getting it. And I think we're nearing the end of the time during which you can expect it to be provided to you for free, thanks to government intervention and socialisms, as I like to say. And I think that appropriation, well, the appropriation runs out. I don't know if they're renewing it. COVID everywhere is being treated as though it's over. It's not. And you might as well inoculate yourself against it while it's still free. The numbers are climbing slowly, but they're still climbing. That's the problem. We are, of course, if you've been watching my nightly counts, past 1,078,000 deaths reported according to Worldometers in the United States. And by the way, I have observed a weird anomaly. So as an early warning system, I will tell you something is going on in, what did I say? Was it Slovenia? Rats. I forget offhand now exactly which one I was talking about. But I'll go check from last night. I round up the top 10, keep track of who's in the top 10 of the highest average caseload, the number of reported cases per million residents, both internationally and here in the United States among the states. And there's not much movement lately in the new cases, but and it stayed pretty static. But there was definitely something going on in Slovenia. Among the most infected, I guess you would say, the most infected countries or territories around the world, like I said, it's remained kind of static for a while. There's a little bit of movement, and it's kind of interesting to see when a tipping point occurs and somebody new joins the top 10 or somebody else drops out. The Faroe Islands will get lots of mention because occasionally someone has downloaded the show from the Faroe Islands. Oh, and I found out via email too who was it that well, at least one person who downloaded the show from New Zealand, but not a New Zealander, just someone who was in New Zealand, an American who happened to be in New Zealand and was downloading the show just to keep abreast of things here. Don't want to give away too much, but might be an amazing story. Maybe we can get them to record it and we can play it as a segment here on the show. We'll see. Anyway, the Faroe Islands, which I guess the show was being downloaded by a salmon, and it stopped at some point, is the most infected jurisdiction listed among those in the Worldometers database at 703,416 cases per million. So, yeah, some 70% of the population officially reporting, more or less. I mean, I guess there's been some repeat infections, and there may be some people, who are being counted twice. That's obviously happening lots around the world. At any rate, Faroe Islands, San Marino, Gibraltar, Andorra, Iceland, Martinique, then Slovenia, Saint Pierre and Miquelon, the odd French territorial anomalies in the middle of Atlantic Canada, Austria, and Portugal round out the numbers there. And you'll notice, again, as has always been the case, the microstates, the places with tiny populations, the numbers being what they are, and the normalization of the numbers by calculating everything per million residents, it tends to happen that their rates get boosted a little bit because their denominator is just not that big. And so I think it skews towards the microstates because, it's very easy to infect nearly the entire population. I also have noted, I've been keeping an eye on this, and it's never come up this way, but I'm waiting for the day it does. But when I do the numbers for the most new cases reported in any given day per million residents. Similar effect there, and it tends to skew towards the microstates, but it tends to skew even just as hard toward the islands, which tend to be microstates as it is. But not only do they have a tiny population, but they're all kind of crammed into a small landmass, and there's really like nowhere to go if you're living on the island. So the islands tend to have a hard time of it around the world. At any rate, I had mentioned that Slovenia, just to let you know, in case you've got a trip planned to Slovenia, don't go. But COVID rates have slowed around the world, and among the top 10, and I admit that there's a big blind spot in the way I present this data, which is that this could be happening among several countries, not just Slovenia, but they're not among the top 10 worst. So I don't see their movement as readily. But what's going on in the top 10 here is everybody's been, like I said, it's been pretty static, and their rates of increase have slowed tremendously. So that day to day, it's typically the case that their numbers of cases per million over the entirety of the pandemic sometimes stay static. Sometimes it's because they stop reporting for a week at a time, and so the number will freeze in place, and then Wednesday or whatever day they choose to report comes around and the number jumps, but it doesn't jump by that much. And what's been happening is that on average, some of these places really have topped out, and so the increase day over day of the total number of cases per million residents for the entirety of the pandemic will only rise, in some cases, literally by one single point, but more often in the 100 to 200 range. And again, we're talking about numbers that are in the several hundred thousands right now. Faroe Islands was 703,416, might increase to 703,511 tomorrow or something like that. Slovenia was on that trajectory, and in the past week or so, day over day and day after day, it's been posting numbers. It's not awful, they're not collapsing or anything, but they are back to where they're posting over 1,000 points, I guess you would say, gained per day. An extra 1,000 people per million are reporting, I guess, positive tests, and those are numbers that we haven't seen for a while. That would be more associated with the rate that people were reporting in, say, the Delta wave. I would say maybe, not the initial onslaught of the pre-vaccine days, but maybe later in the early phase of the pandemic. But this is, when it was spreading more or less uncontrolled, or when we had the Delta wave that just wasn't paying any attention to whether or not people had been vaccinated or whatever it was, however you describe it immunologically. But they're the only one among the top 10 where that's happening. Still a very slow rate of climb, which is what you would expect. Austria having a little bit of difficulty there too, but Slovenia seems to have stood out. So hopefully it's an anomaly, but if anybody, if you're in Slovenia and you know about what sort of mix of boosters they're giving out there, or maybe they didn't boost anybody in Slovenia, I'd be curious to know. I hope it goes away soon, but certainly could be happening elsewhere. But they haven't yet. It may be what puts other countries into the top 10 at some point. The United States, by the way, has dropped out of the top 50 lately. So that's good news for us, except, we're still adding a considerable number of cases. And the rate, thankfully, the deaths that we were incurring has slowed dramatically. But again, we're still well over 1 million, and it's really rather incredible. And not that long ago, we also passed the 200,000 mark dead since the Supreme Court struck down the vaccine mandates. And as you'll recall, when we hit 100,000 dead initially, there was the big banner headline of incalculable loss in the New York Times. I think I did remind you of this when we passed over this. Twice as many as the incalculable loss of that day. passing entirely unnoticed, except for here on this show, and by virtue of the show, in small corners of the Faroe Islands and New Zealand. So, all right. Well, plenty to catch up on. Of course, the big story, which I have not yet really digested, and I haven't seen others fully digest it yet either, and do us the favor. I'm sure we'll get to it at some point, maybe even pick up an article along the way today, or at least by Monday. But yesterday, Judge Cannon issuing her orders with respect to the Mar-a-Lago espionage case. And more or less, as expected, she has done the unexpected. She denied the government's request for a partial stay on her earlier order, will be appointing Judge Deary as the special master, but I guess astonished most of the classified documents / national intelligence legal world by saying, essentially, well, here's what I would summarize it by saying, ordinarily, you expect judges, because this has been the practice, and it may turn out to be the practice again once the 11th Circuit gets a hold of this thing, but we'll see. But it's usually the practice. Federal judges tend to give a great deal of deference to the government and the Department of Justice and the national security industrial complex, I guess, when they claim that something is classified and needs to be protected and needs to be held in a small circle because national security. And ordinarily, they say, right up front that that's going to be their bias, essentially. But they don't have to. I mean, no judge has to do anything. You just do whatever the hell you want, and if you get reversed, you get reversed. But ordinarily, people expect that. And so that's how legal analysis gets done. Lawyers who have handled these kinds of cases or read about these kinds of cases closely enough are able to say, this is the pattern. Typically, you expect a federal judge to say, well, I don't know much about this, but generally speaking, when the Department of Justice comes into a federal courtroom and says national security demands XYZ, we tend to take them at their word to the extent practicable. Judge Cannon has said, yes, but here the person moving for relief is Donald Trump, and he appointed me to the bench, and I love Donald Trump, and I want to protect him from things, and so F that. I don't care that the Department of Justice has come in here and said that national security is at stake. They haven't proven it to me because I have my fingers in my ears. So I'm not necessarily convinced by what they say. But I will point out, automatic deference to the Department of Justice is not necessarily the greatest judicial canon there is. Why? Right? If you're going to be evidence-based, you should come in and lay out your case. Now, granted, here the Department of Justice has come in and laid out its case. But on top of that, the movement here, I guess the movement here is the government looking for a stay. But the other party, Donald Trump and his Kraken head lawyers, haven't really laid out a case either. So usually, if you at least say, well, there's going to be a presumption on the part, on behalf of the Department of Justice that they're not just pulling our legs when they come in and say that there's a national security issue. National security is a ticklish area because one of the things that happens with it frequently is you say, well, as a matter of national security, we have to do X, Y, Z. And you say, now, wait a minute. What do you mean when you say as a matter of national security? Like, what happens if we don't? Well, that's the problem. It's a national security thing. It's kind of a secret. We can't really tell you. Well, what is going on? Well, we can't really tell you that either. So, in an evidence-based atmosphere, that is problematic. But typically speaking, judges do say, well, yeah, we're going to go with the assumption that the Department of Justice isn't just wandering in here lying its ass off, which is not always a great assumption, especially if it's a Donald Trump Department of Justice. But if you're a Donald Trump fan, you probably think that about Joe Biden Department of Justice. And so here we are. So we'll gather up some closer analysis. I'm sure it's out there. I just haven't had a chance to gather it up yet because it's Friday and I was looking elsewhere. Now, But you will have read, I'm sure, about this elsewhere. And let me tell you this: if you're listening live and you want to change the direction of the show because you have read a fantastic analysis of what's gone on, and we could always turn to Empty Wheel, but we'll be there for 12 hours trying to pick up her earlier references about everything. So, okay. Let's see. Oh, I'm going to put this away because it has to do with, this will be day 3 of Martha's Vineyard news for us because, of course, we broke the big Martha's Vineyard story a day earlier than everyone else because I was talking about something completely different that happened on Martha's Vineyard. But it made us sound very prescient. But lots happening there. Lots of speculation about I guess I'll put this on the record. We'll return to this too, perhaps at some point. The possible illegalities of the migrant dumping scheme that DeSantis undertook. Lots of people turning this over in their minds now, and all the details emerging. But most particularly disturbing appears to be the artifice employed in getting these folks onto the plane, promising them sending someone who used possibly an assumed name to San Antonio, Texas, of all places, which, nothing wrong with San Antonio, Texas, but if you are the governor of Florida, it's a weird place to be operating. And it looks for all the world like Ron DeSantis wanting to deport some migrants looked around and found none, just as he wanted to arrest people for voter fraud, looked around, found none, and so instead, set people up by telling people, yeah, you can register now as a felon who's completed their sentence to vote, knowing that no, in fact, many of them actually can't, and then going and arresting those who took the government's word for it that they were allowed to register and vote. Similarly here, hey, we don't have any migrants that we need to deport. Let's go to Texas and grab some, fly them to Florida, and then say, hey, you're an illegal immigrant. We're going to kick you out of Florida. That's essentially what happened here. Not to mention all the other weird implications with all this. But then to fool people onto the plane, apparently by going to a migrant shelter in San Antonio and sending someone there to speak to the folks in their native language and assure them that they were there to help. And apparently picking a group of migrants, as we've noted, they're from Venezuela. They are in this country legally because they are seeking political asylum here. And while they await a judgment on their claim for political asylum, they are here legally. There's a legal status. So they went to them and they said, hey, we know the circumstances in which you've escaped the Maduro regime, as we like to say, in Venezuela, and are fleeing a communist regime looking for freedom here in America. And gosh, if we don't have a program for that, here's the deal. We'll have to move you, though. We're going to resettle you in famous American big city, Boston, where you will be placed in a job. You'll get housing. You'll get food assistance. You'll get clothing. We're going to resettle you as political refugees. Just get on this plane. And people thought, that's a plausible thing. I mean, they've chosen us out of everything. There's plenty of other people here who have just crossed the border with no colorable claim for legal asylum, perhaps, and we're separated out from them. We have some special status. Let's go. And, when you're at the border in an emergency situation and someone approaches you with emergency help, you take it. Only this time it wasn't help at all. It was apparently some operative, I guess, working for Ron DeSantis and or Greg Abbott. And the scheme was on. They loaded them onto the planes. And apparently they handed them some literature, too, saying, here's where you're going, and giving them a map, a rough map of the United States, saying, you're going to Massachusetts. Welcome to Massachusetts. But the promise, of course, was A, resettlement assistance, and B, that they were going to Boston, not being dumped on Martha's Vineyard, which was emptying out for the season and doesn't really have much in the way of resources to help people. But nonetheless, the people of of Martha's Vineyard have come out and offered that help, which of course just makes Ron DeSantis of the world say, see, we were right. They are being taken care of. No harm, no foul. But, using the artifice to lure people out. And by the way, I don't think there's any states that'll have any authority for moving migrants across borders like that. They can deal with migrants that show up in their territory, but moving them from state to state, I think, is pretty much a federal function. And had they been, in fact, illegal, it would have then just been migrant smuggling straight up. So, there could be some legal problems involved in this too. Anyway, as I said, this being Friday, there are a number of other stories that either have slipped under the radar or were just of a different sort that I've been talking about for a couple of days that I'd like to share with you. So we'll get to those probably in segment 2 now that we've wasted time with the chit chat here. I guess I'll just sneak in one thing here that I noticed just before the music goes on. News from NBC that the FBI has charged a Massachusetts woman, it's all Massachusetts news today, with phoning in those bomb threats to the Boston Children's Hospital. And I know, you and I will have heard of those threats having been made in the past couple of days, apparently all connected to the freak out about transgender everything in the world. And I guess the rumor that was being circulated by lunatics like libs of TikTok, who they really should be arresting at this point, was that they were, performing sex change operations on children, basically, is what they were trying to accuse them. So, of course, the answer to that is bomb threats. Then when words got out about those bomb threats, apparently right-wing Twitter took their time out to say, we think this is all made up. These are phony things. There were no bomb threats. Well, there were. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, the same guy who was just talking to you a second ago. Our Patreon subscription drive is still going strong, with over 175 monthly donors who help keep us on the air. If we've helped keep you going during the pandemic, why not return the favor and help us keep going so we can all be together for the next disaster? Patreon.com, Patreon.com, makes it easy to make secure, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. Maybe you'd like to thank us for keeping you sane during the Trump era. Maybe you're looking forward to in-depth explanations of what's going on in the Biden administration. Whatever it is that keeps you listening, we need your help to keep bringing it to you. And hey, if you happen to prefer using PayPal or even the Square Cash app, we're up and running with those options too. Thanks again, everyone, for all your support. We literally could not do this without you. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Yes, so we left off rather abruptly that the FBI has in fact charged a Boston or a Massachusetts woman with making these bomb threats to Boston Children's Hospital. I didn't follow the part of the story that involved right-wing denialism, although that really would have been par for the course. So I can't tell you exactly who it was, but I did see discussed in the last couple of days that some of the prominent right-wing figures in social media spent the last, week or so saying this is all a hoax. Liberals are making this up. There's been no evidence of any bomb threats. And I think that the tenor of the accusation was, well, if there was a bomb threat, then clearly there would be records of calls to 911 from the hospital saying that they've just received a bomb threat. And because that didn't happen, you can pretty much conclude that this was all nonsense and just made up by liberals to discredit the high standards folks behind libs of TikTok, et cetera, et cetera. And this is all just a dirty, filthy frame-up job, except there were, in fact, calls to 911. All of that record now part of the public record, and an arrest has been made. And who should you be blaming? Catherine Levy, Levy, L-E-A-V-Y, of Westfield, Massachusetts, arrested without incident by the way, and charged with one count of making a false bomb threat by telephone. That's pretty descriptive. That's exactly what happened. According to charging documents filed in U.S. District Court for Massachusetts, she faces up to 5 years in prison. U.S. District Court for Massachusetts. Do they not have more than one district in Massachusetts? I don't know. Seems like they got the population to warrant 2 districts, but I don't know. FBI Special Agent Joseph R. Bonavolonta? Wow. Okay. Said at a news conference Thursday that the threat was one of well over a dozen against Boston Children's Hospital. He said authorities are investigating others, so more arrests possibly to come. Boston Children's Hospital has been subjected to a sustained harassment campaign based on dissemination of information online about trans health and trans health care at the hospital. Rachel Rollins, the U.S. Attorney for Massachusetts, I guess it is just one district, said at the news conference, a caller to the hospital on August 30th is alleged to have said, quote, "There is a bomb on the way to the hospital. You better evacuate everybody, you sickos." That's something for somebody who's phoning in a bomb threat to a children's hospital, calling other people sickos. But what can you do? Several children's hospitals, most notably Boston Children's, have been the targets of a far-right harassment campaign for months, led by anti-trans influencers with millions of collective followers who have spread misinformation about the hospital's gender-affirming treatment for minors. The influencers have similarly waged anti-LGBTQ campaigns against schools and libraries that have been featured on conservative news programs. Police investigated another threat to Boston Children's around 11:30 a.m. on Friday, last Friday, I guess, the second that merited a police response in less than 2 weeks. In the last week, some of the same influencers began to express doubt that the bomb threat was real. There you go. On Wednesday, one of the primary drivers of the harassment campaign, Chaya Raichik of the influencer account Libs of TikTok, tweeted an email response from Boston police saying the threat did not come through 911. Many questions remain. Will any journalists investigate? Raichik tweeted to her 1.3 million Twitter followers. Raichik did not respond to a request for comment. And why would she? Because she's famous for making people angry about things, and so she's not going to be very helpful at this point. And really, honestly, why she's allowed on most social media, I have no idea. And also, it's interesting. It used to be that you would maintain your anonymity, and she tried to maintain her anonymity. I guess she was found out and tracked down. But the reason you used to protect your anonymity was because people would come and absolutely kick the living crap out of you, I guess. Back in the olden days, like Trump would say. And they were very rough with you. Back in the old days, they treated you very roughly. And no one's doing that to Chaya Raichik, so I find that interesting. Anyway, she says, no, this is all a hoax because there was no 911 call. But there was. She's, lying about everything. What can you do? Boston Children's Hospital says its focus remains on its patients. Of course, they give a nice statement here, and but doesn't really add to the untangling the news reports about it. But they say what you would expect them to say. The FBI announcement comes a day after a California man pleaded guilty in the same court over threats to the offices of, get this one, you ready for this? If you thought it was crazy that they're threatening children's hospitals, I did read about this yesterday just on Twitter, nothing complex, and I guess I'll have to take a look at this article, or maybe you will on your time, because all I can tell you it's crazy. California man pleaded guilty in the same court, really, in Massachusetts, over threats to the offices of, you'll never guess, unless you already know, Merriam-Webster. Yeah, the dictionary people. He's apparently angry with their, gender definitions. So, Libs of TikTok or somebody got him riled up about that. We need to kill the dictionary people. And he said, that's the part I want to participate in. I'm looking to kill somebody on behalf of my anti-trans, anti-LGBTQ bias. The children's hospitals are covered. Somebody already is looking to kill the drag queens at the libraries. I need to find a new angle on this. Dictionary. Finally, something has come up. I have to kill the dictionary people. I'll take Merriam. You take Webster. I don't know how the deal was, but they're actually doing that. The dictionary publisher closed its offices in Springfield, Massachusetts. That accounts for it all being in the same court. After this man, Jeremy David Hansen, sent the company a threat in October to, quote, shoot up and bomb your offices for, I don't know what. I guess there's a letter missing here. Must be for lying and creating fake definitions in order to pander to the, and he uses some lousy language about the transgender community, the lousy language mafia. The threat came shortly after the dictionary made changes to use gender-inclusive definitions of some words. And of course, that'll probably trigger the whole bunch of them. Anyway, I just find it interesting. And once again, the whole thing about, there's rising violent crime rates. And to prove it, I will, commit violent crimes. Similarly, here in Florida, there's a huge crisis with illegal immigration. And to prove it, and rather smuggling illegal immigrants. And to prove it, I will smuggle them myself. And now and this is exactly the same MO across the board with Republicans. There's a huge problem with voter fraud, and to prove it, I will commit voter fraud and say, see, there you go. And then I get caught and arrested, and then they'll probably claim there's a huge selective prosecution problem, and to prove it, I'm going to get myself prosecuted. And quite frankly, on all groomer accusations as well, this is the case. Where there's a huge groomer problem, and to prove it, I am going to groom some children just to show that it could be possible. I mean, and of course, I learned about this phenomenon early on, as I've mentioned a number of times, in the gun context, where they would argue with you and you would say, I just really don't feel like it's a safe thing to keep a gun in the house, given that there's small kids and there's all sorts of accidents out there and statistics say and they would say, you'll be sorry when I come to your house to murder your family and rape them. Then you'll wish you had a gun. And though they thankfully never follow through on those things, I guess they might now, you never know. And that'll be a next story, I suppose. But the thing is, of course, for them to put fear in your heart that you would be attacked, and then they say, see, the fear you're experiencing is why, is the same fear that makes people feel like they want to have guns to protect themselves. And don't you recognize that as a legitimate right? And it's like, well, if you randomly come to be the victim of a crime, that's one thing, but you can't just go around targeting people and purposefully committing crimes against them so that they turn to violence as the answer. That's not really a debate win. That's just you committing crimes. But they don't seem to really, that doesn't register with them. All right. So speaking of them committing crimes, or rather, more importantly, they're lashing out with violence against people, or following up on their threats. The run-of-the-mill lunatic who does these sorts of things doesn't tend to follow up with the actual violence. But of course, QAnon has turned people a little weird and a little wacky. As a matter of fact, it was in the news the other day. We didn't cover this story, but you might have seen mentioned, as I did. So a lot of rumor mongering today. Where was the case? I don't remember offhand, but that a guy who went off the QAnon edge, apparently shot his whole family, murdered his wife, murdered his daughter, shot his son, if I have this all correct, and one of them survived to tell the story. But yeah, Dad just lost it over QAnon election thievery nonsense and decided, I don't know why you would kill your family over the election being stolen, but, Q murders. We've been waiting a long time and watching. The QAnon people showed up, right, shooting up Comet Pizza, showing up with to make a bomb threat at the Hoover Dam. It's a movement, and they're moving into the active phase. So speaking of that, a story I mentioned yesterday and didn't have time to read and felt like it would be a good Friday long read story. It's right here in front of me now. The Washington Post, in the person of Hannah Allam, reporting this story. Headline, Missing People, Buried Bones at the Center of Oklahoma Mystery. A high-stakes criminal investigation is a window into the often unseen threat of white supremacist prison gangs. Now, ordinarily, a prison gang, while a problem inside of a prison has the advantage of being inside a prison already. But, it makes it difficult to administer those prisons. And one of the other problems with prison gangs is prisoners get out sometimes. And, they haven't really learned to rehabilitate themselves in these prisons. And it's a terrible nuisance, let's say, when they get out and do terrible things. Here's the story. The Dateline Oklahoma City. The caller had news, but warned LaVon Harris not to get her hopes up. Okay, what's going on? Harris's son, 33-year-old Nathan Smith, had vanished along a dirt road in Oklahoma one freezing night more than 2 years earlier. Detectives had long stopped checking in with her, and Harris could feel her search growing lonelier with each passing month. The call in April from an advocate for families of the missing wasn't encouraging, but it was a lead. Authorities in rural Logan County, just north of here, Oklahoma City, had discovered human remains belonging to more than one person. Eesh. Also, the caller added delicately, the remains weren't intact. Oh dear. Harris, 58, sat down to steady herself. She listened, then hung up to tell her daughter. I said, Lou, they found these bodies, Harris recalled. They've been burned and cut. Smith is among a dozen or more people who have disappeared in recent years from the wooded, unincorporated terrain outside the Oklahoma City metro area, a rural haven for drug traffickers. Some families said they're scared to call police or even to put up missing person signs because they suspect the involvement of white supremacist prison gangs. Yikes. Now, interestingly, I was just thinking about reading this aloud to a conservative audience. They would be saying, oh, drug traffickers. And they would have a very specific picture of, well, of course there's rising crime, even in Oklahoma, even in rural Oklahoma, because drug traffickers, and you know how it is with drug traffickers. And then, of course, you get to the end of the paragraph and it's the involvement of violent white supremacist prison gangs. And guess what? The complexion of the makeup of white supremacist prison gangs probably doesn't match the mental picture some people had when you started to say drug dealers. But guess where the majority of the drug problem is in this country? Anyway, in April, authorities acting on a tip said they found charred piles of wood and bone on a 5-acre patch of Logan County, opening one of the grisliest and most sensitive criminal investigations in Oklahoma's recent history. Not New York City, not Los Angeles, not San Francisco, not Chicago, but Logan County, Oklahoma. Behind the 10-foot metal walls of a compound with links to the Universal Aryan Brotherhood. And how are there compounds like this? I mean, where's the Bayraktar when you need it? I mean, we just allow too much in this country. I would say crack down on, take a hard line on crime. Well, when it's prison gangs, you might have some support for that. But yeah, a compound with 10-foot metal walls. I think at that point, it's like maybe you have some police interest in figuring out what's going on in here. And it has links to the Universal Aryan Brotherhood, a white supremacist prison gang. Well, behind these walls, officers found what they believe to be a body dumping ground where multiple people ended up dismembered and burned, according to 4 Oklahoma officials with knowledge of the investigation. They spoke on condition of anonymity because of the extraordinary security precautions around the case, you might imagine. Apparently, this is the way you rehabilitate yourself in Oklahoma prisons. You get out and, he's doing a good job adjusting to the harsh realities of the real world. He hasn't been picked up on suspicion of any violent crimes or anything like that lately. And that's not because he's adjusted well and mentally stable and doing well integrating himself into society, but because he's murdering everyone he has a problem with and dismembering them and burning their bodies, and we're just not finding them. So, that's a bit different. Seems like a different story when told from that perspective. The Oklahoma State Bureau of Investigation, or OSBI, which is leading the multi-agency state and federal probe, confirms that remains have been found but will not say how many. An April 29th report in the Oklahoma newspaper, the first news of the discovery, quoted the state medical examiner and other sources as saying agents were investigating, quote, whether a white supremacist prison gang is behind 9 or more disappearances after the discovery of the commingled remains of possibly 3 people. The report said remains were also found at a second site near an oil well about 18 miles away in the tiny town of Luther. 4 months later, the scope of the case remains murky. A law enforcement official who, like others, spoke on condition of anonymity to discuss an ongoing investigation, said they were informed the count was up to 12 different DNA profiles. One family of a missing person said they were told of 8. Another heard about 3. The OSBI has taken significant steps to keep the investigation opaque, including advising families of the missing to stay quiet. We're just trying to keep some people alive at this point, a second official said, describing the struggle to protect potential witnesses. That level of danger is a jarring reminder of the unseen threat of white supremacist prison gangs whose leaders run crime syndicates from behind bars through a network of enforcers on the outside, according to extremism monitors and Justice Department court filings. And, rising to like Russia level of mobsterism. One of the problems with dealing with a gang like this, of course, would be, what's the punishment? When you find out, somebody's been murdering their local enemies and chopping them up and burning them, we'll send them to prison, which is, of course, the headquarters of their gang. And then they just rampage through the prison and murder people there. And they don't really value their own lives a great deal either. So it's awfully difficult to, know exactly what to do with groups like this. The gangs have carried out hate-fueled attacks both in and out of prison, with the bulk of their free world violence targeting rivals and informants, authorities say. Because the gangs typically keep their business within the criminal underground, the attacks go largely undiscussed in the broader national conversation about rising violence by far-right groups. Oklahoma is a, quote, problem state. That's an interesting way of putting it. With at least 5 significant white supremacist prison gangs, said Mark Pitcavage, an Anti-Defamation League researcher who has monitored the group for decades. A problem state, something that, the way Donald Trump used to call, with using his colorful language for the S word, the S-hole countries, except this time it's actually a state here, part of our union. But, a problem place where there are warlords murdering people, American Mogadishu. He co-authored, Pitcavage did a 2016 study that called Prison Gangs the fastest growing and deadliest sector of the U.S. white supremacist movement, noting that they combine the criminal intent and know-how of organized crime with the racism and hate of white supremacy, making them twice as dangerous. Uh-oh. Yikes. The Logan County investigation, authorities say, involves one of the most ruthless of the gangs, the Universal Aryan Brotherhood, also known as the UAB. One of the main UAB shot callers, authorities say, is a 57-year-old named Michael, I don't know how he pronounces it, but it's Mikel, Michael Bulldog Smith. An inmate so violent that an Oklahoma prison report once called him the most dangerous man in the penitentiary, and corrections officials built a special cell for him in 1989. Smith is serving a life without parole sentence for the 1985 killing of a math teacher in a robbery. Soon after arriving in prison in 1987, he stabbed a fellow inmate. 2 years later, he nearly killed a prison guard by stabbing him in the heart with a blade attached to a broom handle. In 2014, Smith was convicted of choking a cellmate to death with a sheet. Not easy to keep under wraps, you see. Members of Smith's extended family own various parts of the 5-acre area where remains were found in Logan County. Smith's wife, Robin, was listed as owner of the fortified compound. His brother, Charles, owns an adjacent property, according to sales records. Another brother, Philip, disappeared from the county in 2020, one of the long list of cases authorities say are now under review. So if one brother says, we really can't be murdering people and burying them here on our property, I know you do you, but I'm not letting you bury them on my property. Oh, well, what about if we murder you and chop you up? Then we can bury people on your property. Oh, no. Well, not great. On August 19th, according to state investigators, another Smith relative, David, was arrested at the compound on charges related to a stolen vehicle and possession of a firearm by a felon. I suspect there are a lot of felons in there with firearms. Maybe they should look into that. In the OSBI's few public statements about the remains, there is no mention of the alleged ties to one of Oklahoma's bloodiest prison gangs or reference to the site in Luther. The statement said only that law enforcement from multiple agencies recovered bone fragments in Logan County and were working to identify them and determine the cause of death. I've got some idea of the cause of death, but okay. The medical examiner's office and law enforcement agencies involved either declined to comment on the record or never responded to queries. OSBI declined to comment beyond its news release. The investigation is very fluid and very active, said an OSBI release dated August 8th. Because of that, the volume of rumors and speculation is high. The OSBI will not comment on the rumors that can jeopardize the ongoing investigation. The statement said investigators and sheriff's offices in 3 counties have been working closely with the families of the missing persons, including collecting DNA samples to help with identification. That work will take time, the release said, because of the physical condition of the remains recovered. On a scorching recent afternoon, Carol Knight looked out over her 20-acre plot in rural Choctaw, about half an hour's drive from where the remains in Logan County were found. A successful bail bond agent, Knight bought the property in 2020 with plans to build a country dream home. Instead, I got a chop shop, she said. Eek. So, unsuspecting, as Knight began clearing the land, she and her husband uncovered jaw-dropping surprises buried underground. We dug up a car. We dug up a motorcycle. We hauled 3 boats off the property. She carted off about 300 tires, apparently leftovers from cars that were chopped and sold for parts. Knight said she almost broke her ankle falling in a hidey hole, one of several camouflaged pits. The previous residents had extensive criminal records and hung with a crowd that included known UAB associates, according to authorities and public records. Knight said she saw the buried junk as an expensive nuisance until she received a tip last year that a body might also be hidden on her land. Unsettled, Knight halted work and sought help from fellow bondsman Jathan Hunt, a licensed private detective who brings his specially trained German shepherds on searches for missing people. I said, Jay, why don't you all bring your dogs out here and see if I got a dead body? She recalled, just casual. Why don't you just come on over and see if you can find a dead body talk, as frequently happens among rural residents of Oklahoma. The rumors were tied to the disappearance of 43-year-old David Anthony Orr, a Hispanic man from the Oklahoma City area who struggled with methamphetamine addiction and ran in the same drug circles as UAB associates, according to one of Orr's family members and public information compiled by Hunt. In January, Hunt searched Knight's property as part of a team of about 24 volunteers using 5 dogs with training on clandestine grave detection, as they call it. When the dogs alerted to 2 areas near a large pit and a pond, the searchers called Oklahoma County investigators. The authorities left with a bone that Hunt thought resembled a metatarsal, part of the foot, but he said he never heard back on whether it was determined to be human. After the search, Hunt said he kept thinking about Orr and added the case to volunteer work he was doing with Oklahoma City Metro Search and Rescue, a nonprofit group that helps families of missing relatives. In most cases he'd worked on, Hunt said families were eager to hang posters or appear on local news. Not so with Orr, who was last seen on January 16th, 2021. This was The first one where I was like, man, no one is looking for this guy, not even his family or friends, Hunt said. I thought, that's weird. And it is. Hunt made inquiries and discovered that Orr does indeed have relatives who are desperate to find him. It's just too dangerous, he said, for them to publicly seek information on his whereabouts. One of Orr's relatives, speaking on condition of anonymity because of those risks, said they were advised by people they described as Orr's associates to stop searching or else they'd end up like him. On the street, the relative said, Orr's death is accepted as fact, but the family can't acknowledge it or mourn without confirmation. You have to live with the anxiety. You have to live with the fear that these people are still out there, the relative said. You've got to be careful who you talk to. Using the tips he was picking up, Hunt said he found overlapping social connections among at least 5 missing people, including Orr and UAB associates. Last spring, Hunt said he received a tip that Orr's body was burned and buried in a property in Logan County, possibly along with 3 others. Hunt said he tried to share the information with investigators only to get the brush off. Finally, Hunt said he reached a lead detective on the case who told him to sit on it because we've got something in the works. 2 days later, authorities carried out the raid in which they found remains. The Logan County property matched the description Hunt had heard about in the search for Orr. Hunt called Knight, whose response was OS word, the word we're talking about here. So yeah, wow, pretty crazy, don't you think? We're coming up on our second break here. I'll read you another paragraph or two, but I think you get the flavor for what's going on here. At daybreak on April 13th, dozens of law enforcement officers massed outside the Logan County compound with a search warrant, prepared to face an ambush. Yeah, I would probably think about that too. That's a pretty real risk, I would say. Given the reputation of the UAB, planners had gone over all the worst case scenarios. Law enforcement officials recalled they had taken into account the possibility of booby traps and explosives. They wondered if cages could be opened remotely for the simultaneous release of more than 25 pit bulls on the property. Above all, they worried about a potential shootout as they entered through what Logan County Sheriff Damon Devereaux called the Fatal Funnel, a narrow, metal-sided driveway entrance. Scary. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. I think at this point we can probably depart from the story. There's a lot more, and I invite you to read it over the weekend if you have the stomach for it. But I think you get the idea here. I just wanted to put out there and on record the fact that there, were such things happening, and we're, I guess, maybe only reaching the tip of the iceberg with this. But I suppose, it deserves to be on the radar that there really are people out there who can run operations like this, and although if they limit themselves to eliminating other rivals among the criminal element, I guess it doesn't always make the radar. But people are people, and you can't be going around murdering your rivals and disposing of their bodies and not be held to account for it. But I guess you can for several years at a time anyway. It's just a little worrisome, to say the least. And these are the people you worry about when you start to hear about threats of civil war with the white supremacists. Although, quite honestly, I guess when the hurdle they still need to leap there is getting prison gangs who are involved in enforcement of their own drug dealing circles to care about, are they going to be like, yeah, the election was stolen, we should pitch in with these guys because we're losing our country. I don't think they really care that much about that. But they might do the enforcement for cash. That, always talks. And I guess with the billions in dark money floating around out there, you don't want any of that to end up in the hands of people who say, let's just kill local Democrats and burn their bodies and pay the UAB to do it. They don't care. Money's money. It'll work. Let's just make sure it's untraceable, like with Bitcoin or some dumb thing like that. Just, throwing that out there as a possibility. By the way, speaking of throwing things out there as a possibility, just spy novel plots. I'm brought back to something I was thinking yesterday that somebody else brought up as a possibility, and I don't know what the likelihood of it being anywhere grounded in reality could possibly be, but it would make a great spy novel. But someone was pointing out, all these migrants who were taken and flown off to Martha's Vineyard, almost assuredly no particular vetting going on with who the people are. I imagine that, Ron DeSantis had this stunt in mind and nothing was going to dissuade him from doing it, which, by the way, is, just another tangent, I guess I would say. I think it's possible that at some point, Ron DeSantis and his merry pranksters, as I'm sure he considers them to be, as opposed to, vicious migrant traffickers, with no moral bearings and no conscience whatsoever in order to pull something like this, probably thought, it's a toss-up. Did they think, how come no one has ever thought of this before? Why don't we simply make our problem their problem? And then they'll be the hypocrites when I think a lot of people were also speculating that Ron DeSantis was pretty sure that if he dumped these people in Martha's Vineyard, because Martha's Vineyard is a hotsy-totsy vacation spot. Well, it's only a hotsy-totsy vacation spot during the summer, and then the hotsy-totsy folks leave and leave it to the regular year-round residents who aren't quite so hotsy-totsy. But he thought, I think, that there would be limousine liberal backlash. We don't want these people here either, even though we advocate for welcoming migrants into our community as Americans. But so long as it all happens, in the view of people like Ron DeSantis, they think, because they're the victims in everything, of course, they think that limousine liberal Northeastern and San Francisco elites want it all to happen, just not in my backyard. They're NIMBY about that. And so long as it's confined to places like Texas, they don't really care about the border crisis, such as it is, if there even is one. But they certainly don't care about immigrant populations. They just want them to happen elsewhere. And we'll take the fight to them, and they'll see how we here at the border, like Florida, which does not have this problem, suffer with immigration problems, and we're going to dump them on them and see how they like it, even though Florida doesn't actually have that problem. And to the extent that they do, it's usually people from Cuba who have a special dispensation to migrate to Cuba because Cuban Republicans are very organized and powerful in Florida, and they tend to look the other way, which is what originally, by the way, made Ron DeSantis allegedly sympathetic to the plight of Venezuelans, signing a bill at some point or a resolution about, aiding the victims of communism, and they would be welcome in Florida if they were fleeing the Maduro regime, just as if they were fleeing the Castro regime in Cuba, because that's the way we do things here in Florida, because we like to placate the Florida Republican Cuban community. And so they wanted to show solidarity with those fleeing Venezuela. But then again, they also didn't really care because they weren't actually Cuban. They were Venezuelan, and who cares about them? But it made a good copy for the day. Then when he finally got his hands on some Venezuelans, and Venezuelans not usually landing in Florida because it's not easy to boat from Venezuela it's not easy to make it from Cuba to Florida, but it's a little easier than it is from Venezuela. Venezuelans come up the land bridge, they land in Texas, and he had to go and import people from Texas to then deport from Florida, et cetera, et cetera. We've been over those grounds. But what I was going to say here was, what? I can't even remember. Oh, yes, right. Well, one, the various ethical and legal problems that crop up. I think I did lose the thread here now that I'm thinking about it, with this, too many tangents. But let me look back. I think I was landing on some of the Twitter discussion of all of this. I just thought it was kind of interesting. Oh yeah, right. I noticed the comment from Peter Hamby, who is, well, how would we describe him? He describes himself this way. He's a blue check-marked fellow who says he's the host of Snapchat's Good Luck America. I don't even know what the hell that is. A partner at Puck News, which Greg mentioned the other day. Also, I guess, bylines at CNN, Vanity Fair, etc., etc. Not certain exactly, where he fits in the panoply of journalists, but he was observing. It sounds like he was almost apologetically observing. It sure is political, and it adds confusion, but I'll say this: the migrant stunts are showing the rest of the country what a lot of small towns and Customs and Border Patrol agents and shelters deal with all the time along the southern border. The idea here being, well, we'll share the pain and try and trigger these limousine liberals into showing that they too are bigots at heart as they protest people being brought to their hotsy-totsy communities. And it didn't work out, although eventually it may, I guess, if you keep dumping people, but no one has denied that border towns will be stressed by the influx of immigrants. It's just, well, one, we try and provide some federal support to try and manage this thing. I'm sure it's not nearly enough. Two, you're not actually inclined to help. And when we do give you money, you tend to use it for things like, let's buy weapons to shoot the people instead of food to feed the people. So that's a problem. But anyway, he didn't get the desired reaction of snooty liberals running around saying, "Ooh, how gross, brown people." So that didn't work out. But also, even this sort of weird speculation like, well, it does tend to illustrate in stark terms exactly what the crisis is like down on the southern border. So even people in Martha's Vineyard can come to understand it. But I was sort of commenting. So, here you have people like Ron DeSantis saying, why don't we try this? No one has ever thought of this. Possibly. This could be his thinking. Just picking them up and moving them there, and then that'll illustrate the problem. Well, a number of problems with that. One, the reaction that he got out of the supposed limousine liberals isn't the one he wanted. Two, the limousine liberals have left already. And three, I guess, as others have pointed out, a lot of those people who hang out on Martha's Vineyard aren't limousine liberals. They're limousine conservatives, and they're donors and supporters of Ron DeSantis. And he could have pulled this stunt a lot earlier while they were still summering in Martha's Vineyard, but he didn't. He waited until they had cleared out and they wouldn't be personally inconvenienced. So as it turns out, once again, every accusation is in fact a confession. The NIMBY people he was worried about offending are the conservatives who hang out on Martha's Vineyard and had vacated the place and made their way back to Florida and Perva-Lago before he dropped these migrants on the island. Anyway, the other thing is, no, he's not even the first one to think of it, because others apparently way back in the day in the 1960s, other people have documented, it was a Concerned Citizens Council, the CCC, in other words, KKK light, who were doing these things, saying, for all you northern liberals who think that, as they then said, Negroes ought to be treated equally and who disdain our system of segregation, how would you like it if they were living in your neighborhoods? And they would pick them up and move them to northern neighborhoods and say, aha, see, what do you think about that? And of course, they said, oh, all right. And it didn't really work out that well. And so I guess they stopped doing it, and probably for other reasons as well. So one, it's got there's a racist history of doing this, and it just so happens that Ron DeSantis has landed on it. But he may, in fact, have come to this himself, thinking, nobody's ever done this before, and why didn't I think of this sooner? And basically, it's a form of why don't you just-ism. You're having a problem with immigration in your neighborhood, and he was not. But let's say you wanted to pretend you were, or express solidarity with those who were, and you say, well, why don't you what if we just pick them up and move them? Why not just do that? We're going to put them on buses and dump them in D.C., dump them in Chicago, dump them in New York, as Greg Abbott has been doing. Why don't you just? Well, and that's sort of posited here. That's implicit in Hanby's comment, I think, here, and saying, well, it does, for all the problems with it, it does bring those problems home to a population that has avoided it up until now. But here's the deal. As I was saying on Twitter about it yesterday, look, sometimes, most times, in fact, the answer to why don't you just kind of policy questions is simply because as good as you might think it would be, or as it might feel to do this thing, it would be wrong, it would be immoral, it would be illegal in some cases to do it. In some cases, of course, it's been thought of before and made illegal because it has happened before. There's actually a law against it. Why aren't people doing this? Well, they haven't been doing it for the past 50 years because it was made illegal 50 years ago when they did it last time and the racists thought of it. And that's why you're not seeing it happen. People actually know the history and know the law, aren't doing it. But people like you who just arrived here and think you thought of everything will try it, and then you'll realize, oh, it is against the law. Darn, I wish I hadn't done that. Not to mention the fact that a stunt like this that treats people like garbage is not nice in itself. And also, I mean, there are analogs here, right? Like, oh, well, there's problems in these poor rural southern areas and they want to make their problems known to the rich areas. Well, there's some problems that happen in other parts of the country that don't get experienced in the salt of the earth rural counties either. Like, would it be okay to ship busloads of D.C. residents to the county seats of some of these rural counties out in the hinterlands and lay siege to their government buildings and smear them with feces and destroy them and try and disrupt the conduct of county business? Because that happens in D.C., but not elsewhere. Should we share that pain? No, sometimes it's just, well, that's where these things happen. I'm sorry that there's pain along the border, but what are you going to do? There's a border. It's going to happen. You might as well, it's not so much get used to it, but like accept some help when we offer it and stop trying to kill everybody. Anyway, I just thought that was worth noting. And I guess this would be a good time I'll scroll down and find the article about the historic roots of this problem. It's actually from Esquire magazine, written up by Kate Story, and dated just yesterday. Ron DeSantis flew immigrants to Martha's Vineyard, echoing a racist stunt from exactly 60 years ago. In 1962, it was just a bunch of racists. This time, the inhumanity comes at the hands of the state, except that, yeah, they're just racists. They have suits and they happen to be the current government at the time. That's the difference, which is a bad thing. Yesterday, close to 50 undocumented immigrants arrived on the tiny island of Martha's Vineyard. You know the backstory to it. When they landed at the airport, they had a brochure for the Martha's Vineyard Community Center. So they walked the 2 miles to get there, having had nearly no food or water all day, according to the Cape Cod Times. The 2 planes left from Texas, but many of the immigrants were originally from Venezuela. It didn't take long for Florida Governor Ron DeSantis to take credit. That's another weird aspect of this whole thing, too. It's interesting that, he took credit because, I imagine because he built the scheme, but, why Greg Abbott wasn't taking original credit, I have no idea. Anyway, yes, Florida can confirm the 2 plans with, as they say, illegal immigrants that arrived in Martha's Vineyard today were part of the state's relocation program to transport illegal immigrants to sanctuary destinations. The governor's communication director, Taryn Fenske, told FoxNews.com. That's a whole other aspect of the thing. And by the way, you should read Greg Sargent on this topic as well, who really lays out a lot of the workings of it, particularly the angle that, as it turns out, Ron DeSantis hired a videographer to document this whole operation. He wanted this for like campaign commercials. The government should absolutely be seizing those tapes, by the way. What government? I mean the federal government, not his government that he runs. But they should be seizing that tape. I'm sure it will have evidence on it in the form of background conversation among the people on those planes as to exactly what they were told when they were in Texas, and it'll give you some idea of who you ought to be arresting. Start, by the way, with the pilots. The names have to be known by the air traffic control authorities in Martha's Vineyard. They know who the pilots are. Start with them, and they'll say, it's not my fault. I'm just a charter pilot. Somebody chartered me I don't check on the identities of these people. I just fly the planes. Well, I think you actually do have kind of a responsibility to do some checking on this stuff. Maybe not in the private charter world. You might be able to get away with that. But at least, look, give us the name of the people who paid you. Well, I was paid by the boss of my company. All right, boss of the company. Now we need to arrest you until you tell us who paid you. And then we'll get to the bottom of this stuff. Anyway, yes, so here's Taryn Fensky telling Fox News. That's the other thing, right? They tipped off Fox News right away. They were very proud of this operation, and they wanted Fox News to carry the news because they thought it would be received with, "Ha! I told you those limousine liberals needed to get it stuck to them, and why didn't anybody think of this before?" Well, they had. As we said, Fox News ran the story under the banner on its homepage, "Exclusive, DeSantis flying illegal immigrants to swanky hideaway for the rich and famous," which, again, I don't know why that didn't backfire right away. I think that's another angle to press on this, is, with the Republicans are constantly out there complaining, they're giving away free clothing and food and health care to these immigrants, and when's my bailout, and they don't treat Americans this way. Well, now they're flying them to, as they say, the swanky hideaways for the rich and famous. Why isn't that bothering you? Anyway, it was, as it turns out, like we said, it was 60 years ago when this corner of Massachusetts was the center of a similarly cruel stunt. It was a little told chapter of history, called in the media at the time, quote, "the Reverse Freedom Rides." In the summer of 1962, a group of white segregationists and supremacists known as the White Citizens Council. Oh, that's the even more overt one. The White Citizens Council. I thought we were talking about the Concerned Citizens Council. They weren't telling themselves they were white. But anyway, similar organizations. But the White Citizens Council passed out leaflets and placed want ads in southern newspapers to recruit black families with the promise of jobs up north, and in particular in Hyannis, where then President John F. Kennedy spent summers with his family. The ad reads, "President Kennedy's brother assures you a grand reception to Massachusetts. Good jobs, housing, etc. are promised." The deceptive and inhumane plan was a response to the heroic freedom rides the year before. Civil rights activists rode buses into the segregated South, and a year later, the White Citizens Council sent busloads of black riders up to the North. For many years, certain politicians, educators, and certain religious leaders have used the white people of the South as a whipping boy. Oh, that's who were the whipping boys. I see. I didn't know. To put it mildly, to further their own ends and their political campaigns, said Amos Guthridge, one of the White Citizens Council organizers, in footage unearthed by NPR's Gabrielle Emanuel in 2020. "We're going to find out if people like Ted Kennedy and the Kennedys, all of them, really do have an interest in the Negro people, really do have a love for the Negro." Many of the 53 people who arrived at Hyannis, including 33 children, were sent to the Cape Cod Community College, where they were given food and bedding collected by the Cape Cod chapter of the NAACP. "It was one of the most inhumane things I have seen in my years of social action work," local Cape activist Margaret Mosley said in a 1994 interview. Yesterday, the undocumented immigrants flown to Martha's Vineyard were taken to nearby churches for a place to sleep after being given pizza, salad, and soup by local volunteers. One man told the Vineyard Gazette that they were promised housing and jobs when they arrived. "Republicans who call themselves Christians have been plotting for some time to use human lives, men, women, and children, as political pawns," Massachusetts Representative Dylan Fernandez tweeted last night. "It is evil and inhumane." Well, you know the story, and now you know the background and the racist history of exactly this kind of activity. And I don't know what they did in terms of making it illegal, but it's certainly the case that there are statutes on the books that could be pressed. I don't know if they were in response to this earlier White Citizens Council activities. But again, usually the answer to why don't you just do this fun thing that seems like it would be so hilarious is usually, because you could get arrested for it, or at the very least because it's inhumane and immoral. Now, let's see. Patrick Snyder had sent me this notice yesterday in the form of the tweets from Andrea Juncker, who may pronounce it as Juncker. I don't know, I guess the original German. But who points this out. Did you know Section 274A1A2, there's lots of Roman numerals and uppercase and lowercase, but yeah, Section 274A1A2 of the Immigration and Nationality Act makes it a federal crime to knowingly transport undocumented persons across state lines. Goes on to say Ron DeSantis and Greg Abbott should be immediately arrested. Now, I haven't read the section, and there's some question about the applicability because it's not entirely clear what their legal status was, how documented or undocumented they may be, and whether 274A refers to them in terms of being illegal versus undocumented, and whether the whole thing applies, but it's certainly worth looking into. So, that's out there as well. And let's see. Also, of course, we got a similar note about this earlier stunt that we just read about in Esquire from Warfare Class, who you know perhaps as our correspondent who goes by the screen name on Twitter of Employee of the Month, who, by the way, uses a profile picture that includes Carl's Jr., which I also thought was related to Hardee's in some ownership fashion, but probably more a reference to Idiocracy than anything else, saying DeSantis is not even particularly original. This, the tweet from the JFK Library, telling us the same story. To embarrass Northern liberals and humiliate black people, Southern white citizens councils started their so-called reverse freedom rides, giving black people one-way tickets to northern cities with false promises of jobs, housing, and better lives. But they probably did get, in the end, jobs, housing, and better lives. But that's not a no harm, no foul situation. That's, you people are terrible. You could have provided them with all of these things too. Instead, you thought hypocrites in the North wouldn't, but they did. And I guess that probably explains the short lifespan of all of this. All right, let's see. Other things worth noting for the record. There are many. Let me go. Well, and there are so many of them in my feed. It's difficult to search among them. Let me jump over to this one here quickly, hopefully, before our next break. Talking Points memo, if I can open it up. Unpacking the law behind Cowboys for Trump founders' removal from elective office. I think we made mention of the fact, I'm pretty sure that Greg had mentioned it, that, what's his name here? Or maybe even Joan had mentioned. Coy Griffin, the guy who was the Cowboys for Trump, set himself up with the thing called Cowboys for Trump. There weren't any people in it. It was just him in a hat. But anyway, he, of course, got himself kicked out of office. In fact, under the 14th Amendment's prohibition against insurrectionists, the potential breadth and ambiguity of Section 3, our subheader reads, creates a risk that the measure could be repurposed against its original aims in a way that hurts democracy. And yeah, that is always a risk. This from Aziz Hook, David Landau, and Tim Ginsburg, who write, for TPM, a county court in Santa Fe, New Mexico on September 6, 2022 became the first in more than 150 years to disqualify a person from public office because they participated in an insurrection. District Court Judge Francis Matthew found that Coy Griffin, a former county commissioner and founder of the group Cowboys for Trump, had participated in the violent U.S. Capitol attack on January 6, 2021. By the way, many of them are running for Congress now, so look out for that. Matthew invoked a nearly forgotten part of the 14th Amendment called Section 3, which can disqualify certain people from state or federal office if they have engaged in insurrection or rebellion or given aid or comfort to the United States' enemies. The clause was first adopted after the Civil War to keep former Confederates from participating in politics. The amendment that disqualified people says disqualified people are barred for life from either running for or being appointed to office, but Congress can vote by a 2/3 majority to waive this ban. The clause fell into general disuse after 1872 when Congress gave amnesty to most former Confederates in a move toward reconciliation. Not the financial fiscal bill, but you know what I'm talking about. Some observers have argued, though, that Section 3 disqualification should be dusted off to address the January 6th mob and to stop other people who have threatened and committed violence or tried to disrupt federal elections from serving in government. Matthews' decision has also renewed talk among Democrats and good governance groups about finding ways to use Section 3 against former President Donald Trump in order to disqualify him from ever holding office again. Well, you'll be thrilled to know that as scholars of this constitutional law, there are problems, and we should watch out for them. Next. Hi, everybody. It's me, David. Let's change things up from the old fundraising pitch for just a minute and talk instead about how you can be a part of our show. If you've got a smartphone or any other electronic recording device, why not sit down and record a segment for us? Read us an important article and give us your take. Read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Then send the file to me at kagrox@gmail.com, and I'll try and work it into the show. Short segments, a few minutes in length, are easiest to fit in. And of course, I can't always guarantee that I'll be able to play everything, but if you've ever shouted at your radio or TV about something you wish was being covered, here's your chance to change that. Make the show your own. Send your submissions to me at kagrox@gmail.com. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show. You're on Netroots Radio. So, what are the problems with disqualifying people from public office as insurrectionists? Well, I guess off the top of my head, I would say, well, if you can manipulate what the definition of insurrection is, that would probably take care of it. And if you are looking at the problem of possibly electing people to public office, Republicans in particular, to public office who will say things like, well, voting Democratic is voter fraud, or I just will simply refuse to certify anyone as winner of the election except the Republican candidate. If you're willing to do things like that, then why wouldn't you be willing to say, I just literally define being a Democrat as insurrection and therefore move that you be disqualified from office. And if you get your case in front of Eileen Cannon, maybe it works, right? So let's see what the actual scholars have to say about this. The writers say they are scholars of comparative constitutional law who have worked on democratic backsliding around the world. In a forthcoming article, we point out that disqualification is potentially a useful tool to protect democracy, but it can also be dangerous. It rubs up against the basic idea of democracy as a system in which anyone can run and voters can decide. So they're thinking of a much more legitimate objection, I guess. I mean, is it just supposed to be a moral objection to, gee whiz, why not let the people be represented by who they want? And the answer is, well, you're not really working in a democracy if you're electing people who are actually running on an anti-democracy platform. But, I think my concerns are probably a little more worrying than theirs, but let's see if they get around to some other ones. First, recent attempts at disqualification are addressed. The disqualification of Griffin is one of several efforts voters and advocacy groups have lobbied for after January 6th. Most of these efforts have failed to remove someone from office or prevent them from running, but the examples are still useful in understanding how disqualification might be an alternative to more punitive criminal law options. A suit filed by a group of voters to disqualify Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene, more frequently known on the show as Murdery Trader Greene, for example, foundered in July when a Georgia court affirmed a lower court ruling that she had not, quote, engaged in insurrection. And just wait and see, of course. But anyway, Arizona and Wisconsin state judges have also rejected efforts to use Section 3 as a sword against those who supported the January 6th insurrection, but none of these targets actually participated in the mob at the Capitol. Those people are running for office now, though. Mere support of the rioters or questioning the election outcome is protected political speech under the First Amendment. Griffin, though, engaged in a physical invasion of the Capitol. Matthews' careful opinion contains extensive factual findings and legal analysis, so it tees up nicely the question of whether and how disqualification from Democratic office is legitimate, justified, or effective in defense of democracy. This is especially important in the U.S., where there is a lack of recent historical experience with disqualification of people working in politics. When does disqualification make sense? Other countries make much more extensive use of political disqualification than the U.S. does, as we show in our forthcoming study. Israel's courts, for example, oh boy, that's going to be fun, have repeatedly disqualified candidates for lack of good character. Take a guess at who that comes down on more often than not. In Pakistan, the Supreme Court disqualified sitting Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif in 2017 after he was named in the Panama Papers because of corruption. It's a pretty strong response, quite honestly. There are various costs and benefits to disqualifying someone from office, and there are also open questions of how to correctly interpret Section 3. We focus on the first question of costs and benefits here. Democracies require robust protections for free speech and association, but these freedoms can be abused by those seeking to undermine democracy itself. For example, Matthew documents Griffin's persistent efforts to cast doubt on the legitimate outcome of the 2020 election and to instigate violence to derail President Joe Biden's inauguration. Most of Griffin's actions, however, fell far short of the threshold necessary to justify criminal penalties for incitement. The First Amendment requires that the violence be imminent. It was pretty imminent. Griffin nonetheless participated in a concerted threat to American democracy. Disqualification is a way to address such threats without the heavy hand of the criminal law. I mean, I don't know. Some people are going to argue that that's a pretty heavy hand, disqualifying, counting this person out of democracy, essentially. Well, you can vote like most people, but only for other people. Section 3, more generally, is another way to address high-level misconduct in politics. As we have explored in another study published in 2021, Congress has rarely impeached a U.S. president, and an impeached president has never actually been removed from office. Given partisan dynamics, it's unclear if impeachment could actually remove and disqualify a sitting president. This might leave Section 3 as the best alternative. Now, the risks of disqualification. Matthew's opinion suggests that Section 3's aid and comfort language can go uncomfortably far. It could potentially chill legitimate political speech, including criticism of the government or support for a foreign power that doesn't threaten democracy. For example, plaintiffs justified the need to disqualify Griffin by saying that he committed actions that normalized and incited violence by dehumanizing the opposition as wicked and vile. Dehumanizing speech about political opponents is indeed often unhealthy for democratic practice, but it has become routine in politics. I mean, it has. They're right. That doesn't really, that's not an excuse in itself. That's a bit of circular logic, don't you think? Another challenge is that the text for Section 3 is not entirely clear about how disqualification actually works. Does it apply automatically to anyone who engages in insurrection, or does it require some sort of either judicial or legislative process? There is no settled answer. In an 1869 decision, Supreme Court Justice Salmon Chase suggested that Section 3 did not apply automatically. Rather, disqualification occurred when Congress, or perhaps the state legislature, authorized it. Matthew rejected the position that only Congress could make the determination, and instead held that Griffin could be disqualified by order of a state court. The potential breadth and ambiguity of Section 3 creates a risk that the measure could be repurposed against its original aims in a way that hurts democracy. The bigger picture: disqualification, then, is a superficial remedy to a profound problem. It might be effective against a low-level official like Griffin, but the bigger the target, the less power everyday voters have. Imagine that some court was persuaded to disqualify Trump from a state's 2024 presidential ballot. Such a move could be considered to disenfranchise his supporters. Not really. This could play into Trump's beliefs that the, quote, game is rigged. Well, it certainly will play into his beliefs about that because he doesn't have any beliefs about it. So whatever it takes to make hay out of it, he will. But about disenfranchising his supporters, it's an interesting way of putting it. Like, you can still vote, you just can't vote for that guy. Are you really disenfranchised? I mean, when he dies, are you disenfranchised? No. So what's the difference between that and banning him from, I mean, he's still alive. He could be, I don't know. I mean, there is a difference clearly, but I mean, I don't know if disenfranchise is the word. Anyway, whatever the correct legal answer, there is a strong case for eliminating the uncertainty around how Section 3 works. We've argued for a carefully crafted federal statute that clearly explains when it applies and how it works. If disqualification is to become an effective sword to defend democratic politics, that's lowercase d, it must not become a two-edged one that later weakens the democratic process in the U.S. And I don't think they even really went in the direction that I was thinking of, just saying, well, we're just going to define being a Democrat as insurrection in itself and just abuse the amendment that way. Anyway, put that on your radar too. Just say you heard it here, probably second or third. Anyway, let's see. Other stories worth a little bit of Friday time. There are a lot of them. How about this one, also from the Washington Post? And I guess this is, whose book is this? Another shocking revelation from a book that we didn't hear about until later because yada yada. Maggie Haberman getting a lot of grief for this, but she's about the 15th in the line of this, using the same mechanism. She shouldn't necessarily be singled out for it. There's plenty of other things to single her out for. And this isn't even from her book. But how about this one? Add this one to whatever file you're keeping Let's Buy Greenland in. Remember that? Trump told Jordan's king, the king of Jordan, that he would give him, as though he could do this, the West Bank, shocking the king, Abdullah II, according to whichever book this is. This comes from the reporting of Azi Paibara, again in the Washington Post, who says President Trump once offered what he considered a great deal to Jordan's King Abdullah II, control of the West Bank, whose Palestinian population long sought to topple the monarchy. That's pretty interesting all by itself. Lots of amazing political subcurrents to this idea. I thought I was having a heart attack, Abdullah II recalled to an American friend in 2018, according to a new book on the Trump presidency being published next week. I couldn't breathe. I was bent doubled over. The unreported offer to Abdullah is among the startling new details about Trump's chaotic presidency in the book. Ready? The Divider, Trump in the White House 2017 to 2021 by Peter Baker, chief White House correspondent for the New York Times, and Susan Glasser, staff writer for the New Yorker. To get that word out right correctly, New Yorker. You know the place. The book, a copy of which was obtained by the Washington Post, like, here, have this and review it, is the latest in a long-running series of deeply reported behind-the-scenes accounts featuring or written by Trump administration insiders, with some claiming that they tried to curb the 45th president's worst instincts. But he wasn't an administration insider. He was a journalist. But again, I guess that's another one in a long string of things that people delayed reporting because they wanted to put them in books for whatever reason. Baker and Glasser write that their book is based on reporting they did for their respective outlets, as well as about 300 original interviews conducted exclusively for this book, which would explain, I mean, if you find out from an interview conducted for the book, and then you learn it and it's new, how can you be blamed for not reporting it earlier? So, okay. Anyway, we obtained private diaries, memos, contemporaneous notes, emails, text messages, and other documents that shed new light on Trump's time in office. The husband and wife journalists, did you not know that? I didn't, also conducted 2 interviews with Trump at his Pervalago estate. They call it Mar-a-Lago. You know how they do things. One theme that emerges in the book is the growth of Trump's fixation with attacking his perceived enemies, and an increasing concern among top officials in his administration that they must prevent Trump's lawlessness and erratic demands. Several top officials, quote, were on the verge of quitting en masse, according to the book, citing an October 2018 message Kirstjen Nielsen, then the Homeland Security Secretary, wrote to a top aide over the encrypted app Signal, which she shouldn't be using. Chief of Staff John F. Kelly, Defense Secretary Jim Mattis, General Joseph F. Dunford Jr., Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Education Secretary Betsy DeVos, and Interior Secretary Ryan Zinke all wanted to quit, Nielsen wrote, according to the book. How do you like that? Well, they didn't even want to quit from grifting in public life. Ryan Zinke's back on that wagon. At the time, Trump was fearful of losing control of Congress and eager to appeal to his base of supporters. Fox News was focusing attention on a caravan of migrants, because that's what they do, moving through Central America toward the southern border, referring to it as an invasion. We noted that yesterday. Trump, in his response, urged Nielsen to, quote, harden the border, even to the point of pushing her. Now, this is probably not a quote here, but it's in quotes, so I started doing it. But no, urged her to harden the border, even to the point of pushing her to take action she had no authority to take, according to the book. Very frequently done in Trump world. Just do it and answer questions about it later. Just fly those migrants to Martha's Vineyard, answer questions about it later. Besides, you're the government. Who's going to prosecute you? Nielsen and Alex Azar, the Health and Human Services Secretary, even agreed that they would both resign in protest if Trump resumed family separations at the southern border. In fall of 2018, she wrote to an aide, the insanity has been loosed. Those officials ultimately left the administration, but not in unison over one single issue, and never invoking the 25th Amendment while they were there. The people who were most fearful of his reign were those in the room with him, Baker and Glasser write. So take him out. Oh well. In November of 2018, Democrats swept to power in the House, winning the majority. While he was in the White House, Trump also tried to use his office to punish demands his own aides saw as illegal and tried to stop, according to the book. Trump not only tried to block a merger between CNN's parent company, Time Warner, and the telecommunications giant AT&T, driven by his anger over the network's coverage of him, but also tried to prevent a government contract from going to a company owned by Jeff Bezos, the founder of Amazon. Bezos, of course, owns the Washington Post. He'd do anything to get Bezos, a senior Trump official told the book's authors. Great person to have in the presidency, don't you think? Trump also targeted former intelligence officials, James R. Clapper Jr. and John Brennan, demanding more than 50 times that they be stripped of security clearances. Ironic, given that he is later targeted under the Espionage Act, don't you think? Every Republican accusation is a confession. And when the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Ninth Circuit blocked one of his policies, Trump told Nielsen he wanted her to eliminate the court altogether. Now he's telling the Secretary of Homeland Security, I want you to go out and eliminate a court. Just get rid of the Ninth Circuit Court. Just close it. Well, who would, what? And why would you even be talking to the Homeland Security Secretary about that? That's crazy. Let's just cancel it, he told her. Ooh, the original cancel culture. According to the book, adding that they should get rid of those judges using a profanity. They should get rid of those. What do you think he said? What was his profanity? Let's make it something. Those, I don't know. I mean, if I say it, then I gotta go to the censoring horn anyway. Get rid of those judges. Trump ordered that legislation be drafted and sent to Congress as soon as possible, the authors, right? At least he realized that it would take legislation. And you could do it legislatively. I mean, if Congress would actually pass the thing, they can eliminate the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals. I mean, they'd have to rejuggle some of the numbers. Maybe not. Maybe they could just ignore it. Like District 13 is now gone. And District 9, we have the 8th District Court, a 10th District Court, an 11th District Court, just not a 9th. I don't know. They'd be absorbed. Okay, but you would do legislation. But anyway, he says, write some legislation as soon as possible. Nielsen, according to the book, did what she and so many other administration officials did when Trump issued nonsensical demands, ignored it, and hoped it would go away. Trump, who was eyeing another presidential run, also ruled out picking his former Vice President Mike Pence as his running mate, telling Baker and Glasser it would be totally inappropriate. And I agree. That's probably inappropriate after threatening to hang him. By the way, that part about eliminating the Ninth Circuit was, let's see, who brought that to my attention earlier and just saying, oh yeah, by the way, glad they ignored that stupid order. But, let's see, was it, I keep scrolling to see if I can find it, but apparently not. Okay. Well, at any rate, it was brought to my attention and parked in my KITM hashtag parking spot earlier. And gosh, if it was easier, well, I'll just tell you the story. And I'm sure they would rather I tell you the story than you necessarily make sure that the credit goes for bringing it to my attention. But somebody did it, and one of our usual suspects as well. And I'm sorry it's not immediately available. Anyway, yes, it would be totally inappropriate. Pence's refusal to block Congress from certifying Joe Biden's victory in the 2020 presidential election, despite Trump's false claims that the election was rigged, opened a fissure between the two men. That's why it would be inappropriate. And then he told, apparently Trump, when he talked to him at Pervalago, said Mike committed political suicide by not taking votes that he knew were wrong. What does that even mean? Not by taking votes he knew were wrong? By not taking votes? Oh, what? All right, whatever. I mean, he has it backwards, but he's an idiot. On January 6th, when pro-Trump mob stormed the Capitol, there was, of course, the hang Mike Pence thing. The book also quotes Trump's wife, Melania, whose voice I can't do, expressing deep concerns over her husband's handling of the coronavirus. Maybe she should just talk like him, but with an accent. Can I do that? How would I make that work? Let's see. She spoke directly to Trump in the early days of the pandemic, according to the book, recounted that conversation later to Governor Chris Christie, from whom the president had routinely sought advice. So what did I say? She had deep concerns over the handling of the coronavirus. I wonder if there's it says you're blowing this, she recalled telling her husband. How would that be? You're blowing this. I have no idea how that would sound. This is serious. Oh, now she's Israeli. Never mind. It's going to be really bad and you need to take it more seriously than you're taking it. I don't think so. I think that's just crap. Anyway, that's what she told Baker and Glasser. Trump just dismissed her. You worry too much, Melania recalled Trump telling her, according to the book. The offer to Abdullah on the West Bank, that's the one I wanted to get to, which is bordered by Israel and Jordan and which Trump had no control over, came in January of 2018. Trump thought he would be doing the Jordanian king a favor, not realizing it would destabilize his country, according to the book. Wop, 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 wop. So yeah, he thought, I'm sure, you know what we should do? We should do Middle East peace. What do you think? Jared, get on that. I mean, is that interesting? Does that play well in Israel? By the way, everybody, Jared Kushner presumably would have been on the job of handing over the West Bank to Jordan. Although maybe Israelis would say, great, because I love destabilizing Jordan. But realize, of course, that the West Bank, well, is Palestinian, and they don't owe any particular allegiance or have any particular love for Jordan or the Jordanian monarchy. They haven't been particularly helpful to the Palestinians. A lot of Palestinians probably feel that they've been abandoned by the Jordanians, or that they simply just have nothing in common with the Jordanians. They're Palestinians. They're different. And, but probably, yeah, Trump probably thinks of things in stupid and or archaic or never sensible terms. Well, they're Arabs, right? So they probably want the Palestinians and they'll all get along because then this will be good for peace because the people in the West Bank, they're angry because they don't want to be in Israel because they don't like him because they're Jews. And hey, I can understand that. So anyway, they're Arabs and they want to be with Arabs. And Jordan, they're Arabs, so we'll put the two of them together and Jordan will take it because land, right? Free land, you want that. It's territory. It's great. They'll love it. It'll all be fantastic. But of course, it'd be putting like an internal insurrection in the middle of Jordan and whatever. Anyway, so there you go. He probably thought, I'm doing you a big favor. It's like, it's better than chocolate cake from Mar-a-Lago. I'm giving you land. The West Bank, everybody fought wars over it, so here it is for free. Why wouldn't you want it? A previous excerpt from the book published in August in the New Yorker described how Trump once told a top advisor that he wanted totally loyal generals, like the ones who had served Adolf Hitler, which very highly questionable how loyal they were. Well, he killed the ones that weren't particularly loyal. Unaware, of course, that some of Hitler's generals had tried to assassinate the Nazi leader several times. Trump complained to Kelly, then his chief of staff and a retired Marine Corps general, "Why can't you be more like the German generals who lose and try to kill me?" Anyway, when Kelly asked which generals he meant the German generals in World War II. You know, they tried to kill Hitler 3 times and almost pulled it off. Trump said he didn't believe them. No, they were totally loyal to him because I say so. Well, anyway, that's pretty interesting. So we missed that one during the Trump administration, but maybe they didn't know about it. But where were these people in terms of getting rid of him under the 25th Amendment? Oh, well, it just didn't happen. Let's see. Other things to discuss. There are many. Let's throw this one in here. We're just not going to have time for everything else. But this was an interesting and worrisome report. And I guess in light of we never did get around to, we'll have to double back and do this other thing, this other part of back to Martha's Vineyard. I think I went down a tangent on this one and I never got back around to mentioning it, which was that, there's the possibility, since there was no particular vetting, I think, of the migrants that they moved, though they were Venezuelan. I don't know if that came to DeSantis's attention and whether he would have done something differently if he had known that they were Venezuelan or not. But I think, though, that he was handed, I need Latinos, or Latines, perhaps, if you want to say that, to move, because that's what people are expecting to see here. We have to do this pageantry. We want to move Latinos because those are the ones we want our base to think of as undesirable, and kick them out and bring them to Martha's Vineyard. And the fact that they were Latino was enough for him. But somebody speculated at some point, that's why I was searching back in my Twitter feed to try and find it, that, Venezuela being I guess what right-wingers at least would call a left-wing dictatorship, a communist dictatorship, socialist dictatorship, they are, I guess, according to this one person, involved currently or recently in some military exercises with Russia, who would have been perhaps formerly a Venezuelan supporter. Venezuela might have been a client country of the old Soviet Union, and maybe that relationship continues. And of course, with them sort of re-Sovietizing over there in the face of the Ukraine war, who knows? Anyway, the two of them apparently are involved in some joint military maneuvers. And it was pointed out, and somebody was speculating, hey, do we know whether the people who showed up as migrants, supposedly from Venezuela, were in fact sent there as part of the military exercises? And that's wild speculation, but it does raise a great spy novel possibility. Like, what if they were in fact, Venezuelan government operatives sent to the United States as, who knows what, sleeper cells? There's no reason to believe that this is the case and that they're anything other than refugees. But it does make a great spy novel because it would work beautifully. The Russians are smart enough in their undermining of American democracy to know that DeSantis is going to ask no questions about these people, and he's not going to do any vetting, and he's not going to wonder anything about them being secret agents or whatever. And they also probably know, look how eager he was to get them. They were not in Florida. He went to Texas to import them. Give me some Latinos. I need some Latinos to deport. So he would practically have escorted them across the border from Mexico himself if he needed to, in order to get his hands on these people. If all of the Latinos currently in Texas were being hoarded by Greg Abbott, say. So, the point is they would be very well aware of the fact that he wasn't going to ask any questions, and that he was going to distribute them. His plan was to move them deeper inside the United States. So if they really were like Russian/Venezuelan agents of some kind, how amazing a victory for them to get the anti-immigrant Republicans. He screwed both parties with this one. and get them to pay the expense of moving them deeper into the United States and embedding them in American society and leaving them there. The Russians and Venezuelans couldn't get them across the border themselves fast enough. Too dangerous for them to sneak them across as agents, but disguise them as migrants. Who would have thought that Republicans would be the one to usher them into the country, escort them across the border, and pay the expenses of flying them to the rest of America? But the oddities of the situation, the oddities of the politics are such that they were, in fact, willing to do that. Wow, what a spy novel that would be. Whether or not it has any basis in reality, oh, well, I doubt it. But it's worth thinking about, just in terms of, if nothing else, in terms of how far Republicans will stray from their, we're fiscally responsible, we're anti-immigration, we hate handouts to immigrants. They're flying them on charter jets to vacation wonderlands. I mean, am I wrong about that? Did he not just do that? Anyway, everything's topsy-turvy these days, including one of the stories that I didn't get a chance to get to. We'll have to save it for next week. But I guess I'll just throw it out there in case it breaks more over the weekend. The Insider report from Business Insider. Former top FBI official involved in Trump-Russia investigation under scrutiny by federal prosecutors for his own ties to Russia. What does that mean? Let me ask more about this.
Radio.com.
Tomorrow. No, not tomorrow. Next week.
Listening to Kagro in the morning with David Waldman.
And, of course, the time has come now to listen to Justice Putnam instead, also in the morning here, although turning into the afternoon here, but still morning West Coast with the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Next, with all sorts of goodies for you that we almost assuredly didn't get around to discussing. More of this next week, I'm sure. See you then. Take care.